Hello, this is Julia from the Yoga Teachers Forum, and I'm here today with Joanna Benn, who's going to be running our session on Hasta Mudras. Good morning, Jan.
Morning, Julia. Good to see you on Zoom. How you doing?
I'm good. I thought I'd start this morning by just finding a little bit more about your yoga journey. So how did you come to find yoga in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good question and an interesting one. So I was brought up in a house with yoga. My mum, I think, was one of the few that were doing yoga maybe, 40 years ago in London, when it was only in drafty, cold church halls. And as a little girl, I used to remember packing up her sleeping bag because we didn't used to have nice props and blankets. I used to take sleeping bags in to learn and things like that, and going to this hall with her on a morning on a Friday and watching, usually women, but there were some men, do their yoga. And my mum is still a very active yoga practitioner today. I take her with me to classes. She's keeps up with the best of them, with the 20-year-olds, despite having had a knee replacement and arthritis and God knows what else. And she modifies and she keeps going throughout the class, and she's a real inspiration, actually. So yeah, I found yoga when I was 26, which is quite a long time ago now. Let's say it's coming up for a couple of decades. Because my mum at that time said, you really should do some yoga. It would do you good. Your job is so stressful. Your life is so hectic. I was living in Switzerland at the time, went along to a yoga class, and the rest is history. I've been doing it ever since.
Wow, it's so funny because I've known you for years, and this is the first time I've found out that your mum practiced yoga. So it's amazing when you start asking these questions.
I know. Yeah, so, it's interesting.
So when you started practicing yoga all those years ago, what did it look like, and what does it look like now compared to what it looked like then?
Yeah. So I think my journey is very typical of many yoga practitioners. You start with the physical, you start trying to understand the body and the alignment and finding some benefits from it. I then, with my work, I lived in 7 different countries, and the one constant that I always had with me was yoga. So wherever I lived, whether it was Nairobi, whether it was Rome, whether it was Lausanne in Switzerland, Brussels, I would find a yoga teacher and a studio to practice in. So for many reasons, it was sort of my go-to community and my go-to safe space in many ways. And then when I came back to London, then I was slightly overwhelmed, because London is a wonderful city for yoga, and there's everything here, more than in many other cities actually. And then just carried on exploring, and then decided to do my yoga teacher training after being back here a couple of years. So yeah, that's sort of the potted history of it.
And when you practice the yoga in the various countries, is there anything that stands out as different practices that you learned in different places?
At the time, I found doing yoga in Brussels and in Rome quite challenging. Most of the teachers at the time, I'm sure it might not be the same at the time, were Ashtanga teachers in Rome. And there were a lot of beautiful Italians not wearing very many clothes, practicing this sort of hardcore, Ashtanga primary series, whichever version they were on. It didn't really feel like the kind of yoga that really resonated with me. Found some Shivananda studios that was more in line with the kind of yoga I now practice. Again, in Brussels, it was quite gymnastic-y. It was quite challenging to find the studio that really spoke to the needs that I wanted in terms of the philosophy, the history, the energetic body, the chakras, the more esoteric perhaps aspects of yoga that now when I practice I find most beneficial, or as beneficial as the physical practice.
And were there any countries where you found that? Where did you first come across those esoteric practices?
A little bit in Switzerland, definitely in London, because there's so much going on in so many workshops, and then various trips to India. So I've been to India a few times, done yoga in different places, and that's where you start to open your eyes to some practices where you actually have the time, and some of the students and the teachers that are willing to spend half a day on pranayama, or talk to you about a moving meditation, or go through some of the more, the historic practices and how they now embody them in different places in India. And they're all different, so you learn a lot wherever you go.
Yeah. It's interesting because you've lived in so many countries to know that if you just kind of Googled, I guess it would be now, not opened a book, but Googled yoga to find yoga in your city, what you get is 9 times out of 10, would you say, vinyasa flow?
Probably, yeah. In
order to find maybe other things that maybe you or I practice a lot more often, it takes a little bit of investigation to find the pranayama. I know actually now there's a lot more separated out mindfulness, so meditation practice or breath work. So you probably have to go to 3 different places to find the physical, the breath work and the meditation.
And it also depends on the teachers. I mean, there are certain teachers in London that I know I can go to what might be labelled as a vinyasa flow class and I'll get everything. I'll get some kriyas, I'll get a little bit of breath work, I'll get a flow that's not so fast I can't even find my alignment and I'm skidding around on the mat and feeling frustrated and like I want to walk out, which I have been to some classes like that as well. But you're right, it takes time to find the teachers that embody the practice that, I suppose, do I say as you get older, maybe for some of us, that then speaks to what you and your body and your mind at different points in your life need.
Yeah, you could say that. You could say that it's age, but actually, I've got a 15-year-old who's got GCSEs at the moment, and actually and the posture of teenagers can be interesting, that kind of phone. And young, the very young can need the pranayama and the meditation and the softer practices just as much as we do. And actually post-menopause, there can be a whole freedom to do the physical stuff, because there aren't no cycles giving you time for the month where you need that slow experience. So maybe not just us middle-aged.
No, maybe not. And I mean, it's interesting. I was teaching in a very noisy, very, let's say, un-yogic gym until quite recently on a Sunday morning. It was great experience. It was before I was even actually fully qualified, so I was grateful they let me in. Although I wasn't sure before anyone panics. And even at the back of the gym, with literally house music going on, weights going on around, jump ropes, I could get students, maybe 5 to 10 of them, I mean, certainly not really groups bigger than that, into a shavasana at the end and totally relaxed. And I would sort of think, well, if you can get them to a place like that in this noisy environment, then it speaks to the power of yoga, actually. But it's in the mind, and you can get them there, and it's the withdrawal of the senses, and it's coming in. And I would just be like, focus on me, focus on yourself, focus on your breath, ignore what's going on around. It's all fine.
Yeah, that's I remember when I did my training in Yoga Nidra with people who started off their teaching of Yoga Nidra in South London. Their teaching was very much, if the bus goes by, or the you can hear the police siren, or in central London, those noises are always going to be there. And a lot of people live in places where when they go to sleep at night, the number 54 bus goes past their window. So learning practices that allow the sounds around us to come and go, that's a really valuable thing to be sharing and to be practicing.
I was told by one of my teachers that some of the tantric yogis used to deliberately meditate in front of burning funeral pyres and on top of garbage trucks, deliberately, to practice this.
Yeah.
So obviously we don't know if that's 100% true or not, but it's a nice analogy that, we won't always have that quiet meditation room and the seated poses and our props and everything to find our inner peace. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm just closing the door. There you go, my inner peace. All sorts of things going on around me. I'd really love now to move on to the practice that you're going to be sharing with us at the Teacher Forum, the Hasta Mudras. So my experience of Hasta Mudras is practicing them. I think almost everybody knows the universal Namaste Hasta Mudra.
Anjali Mudra, yeah.
Exactly, there you go, the correct, the correct terminology. But I'd love to know what twigged your interest as far as how is concerned. And maybe today you could maybe share a couple that are your favourites as well.
Sure. So this all stemmed because as part of the Yoga Campus Teacher training, we had to do a 5,000 word dissertation. And I really wanted to do something that was a little different, and also wanted to do something that that just spoke, that I could actually do some original research on, to be honest. And I'm not even sure why, I suddenly got a little bit obsessed with hands overall. So my whole dissertation is about the use of hands in yoga. And I think it was from reading and looking at how in different yoga practices and different traditions, the hands are seen as microcosms, not only of the body, but also of the universe, and also to contain all the elements of the earth, wind, air, and fire in the different fingers.
Yeah.
So the more I started reading, the more I sort of thought, well, this is fascinating. You know, we don't talk a lot about hands in yoga. Yes, we talk about them in terms of alignment, perhaps pranic energy through the ends of your fingers. You might hear teachers say, and don't ignore the fingers, or if you're in anything from a warrior one, you know, make sure that the energy comes from the, you know, from the heels all the way to the hands and sort of to the ends of the fingers. So you'll hear it incorporated in cues and in pose. But very few people actually think about hands, and we do quite a lot on feet. You know, we always think about our feet being grounded and building yoga from the base up, and you know, there's quite a lot that we do on feet, which is great. And I just thought hands are neglected. No one talks about hands. And I became a little bit obsessed and started reading about hands. And then I started to wonder, you know, these ideas of expressions in our hands and doing the mudras, do they really change prana? Can they redirect it? Can they change our energetic and mental body? And, you know, to be honest, in some ways the jury's a little bit out. I don't think we can prove this stuff scientifically. But I think the actual practice of focusing on the hands and changing the hand shapes is incredibly beneficial in terms of at least an intention when we practice, and thinking about making that signal with a part of our body and that seal. So I'm sure everyone listening to this knows that mudra sort of translates as seal, and it's that idea of sealing in the energy in a certain position or place in the body. So yes, and then I should add, that as part of my dissertation, I also got in touch with a couple of neuroscientists, because then I wondered, I saw a YouTube video of people coming and talking about after a stroke, and doctors were actually asking them to use their hands as part of their rehabilitation to get their mind and body working again. So something like just sort of, you know, going through, this is actually quite hard, especially, you know, if your hands are perhaps arthritic or tight, but then if you've had something go on neurologically, making that coordination is really hard work. And doing it, perhaps then if you added a mantra to it, so sa, ta, nam, something like that, then you've got everything being engaged at once. And the long story short is, again, the neurosurgeons wrote back to me amazingly, actually, and they said, well, it's really fascinating. And which I'm amazed they even wrote back, and they said, again, we can't prove it, but we do think that there is a direct link between, obviously, the movement of the fingers and hands and the brain. And when we studied, one of them actually said, I studied Indian dancers, and because they do a lot of mudras in their dancing and hand gestures, and they tell stories with their fingers and hands. And she said, and part of their brain was a lot more active and a lot more enlarged. Now, again, it would take a lot more studies to actually prove this because of the dance, that part of the brain is more active, but we have seen it, yes.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because science is often way behind ancient yoga practice, and actually proving things in a scientific way can take a very long time. But we know intuitively that it's, you know, in our hearts that it's true. So an example might be that often in our language there's the elements. So we say in our common parlance, she's got fire in her belly, you know, like that means she's feisty. Well, guess what? The element of fire is connected to that particular chakra. So I'm going to, if you're not sure or anything, then I'm not meaning to put you on the spot. But I remember when I did some training in Sanskrit, And while I was doing the training, it was fascinating.
Mm.
We sounded out the true Sanskrit sound of the elements, and then we had to guess which one it was, and most of us guessed it right, and connected it to the hands. And I wondered if you could say which finger is connected to which element. Is that something that you can recollect?
Yeah, fire.
Yeah.
The air is the third one.
Yeah.
Water is the fifth one.
Yeah. So water is your finger.
Yeah. Fire is the first one. Air's
the second one.
Yeah, and I'll look up the other two. But I mean, it's yeah.
Yeah. So I know. Yeah.
Some of the traditions put them in different fingers, to be honest. But these ones are consistent. These ones are consistent that I've seen. Yeah.
And is that
if you think about Jnana Mudra, which is the most common one?
Yeah.
Earthing, grounding.
It makes sense, doesn't it? And it's often you think, well, we might not know scientifically that it makes sense.
Yeah.
But it makes sense to have, and the one that people use most commonly, apart from the Namaste, and actually Namaste would be all of them, wouldn't it? So that's kind of connecting the entire.
Well, this one's balance, right? So it's that idea of sealing. In fact, I was saying this last night to my beginner class, where everything is new, and I said, we do this to balance as well as to acknowledge the divine, but it's a sealing in also at the end of a class, of everything that you've done. And we might not really think about that, but that's how I interpret it, this kind of just bringing it back together and then letting it, integrate and letting it out again. So yeah.
It's lovely. I learned some Hasta Mudras that were connected to having a period and the rest time and release during your period.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And I just wondered if there are any specific mudras that you've kind of looked into that are helpful for particular times in your life or particular times of the day, or just ones that are your favourites.
Well, there's some going back to common things that we do in our, let's say, civilian life that also comes back to yoga. So you probably know the Yoni Mudra, right? So there's that one that's very helpful for women.
So it's this. Yeah.
So this one I find actually is very grounding and stabilizing, particularly at different times of the hormonal month. But this one, which, we're classically used to seeing businessmen do this. Someone
sitting at the table,
is actually quite an energizing, powerful mudra as well. And then so obviously we've talked about Jnana Mudra with the hands coming up, which I think probably everyone knows that from having been to most yoga classes, even if you sit at the beginning and they say, so a bit more energizing, bringing the hands up, a bit more, calming, bringing it down. But, I have books. I mean, there are entire books of this. This is a French book that I found with all kinds of different things in different ways. And honestly, it would take a lifetime to explore them all. There's also this one, which is, so it's a bit like a sausage roll, really, if you put so this one is quite nice, doing different kinds of pranayama. It seems to lift the breath up. But we can talk about a lot more of them, and we can play around. And actually, I think it takes time to do some breath work with different mudras. We did this on my yoga teacher training with a couple of the teachers, and you can really feel the breath moving in different directions depending where the hands are. And that's fascinating. It almost seems to very subtly direct the energy into different parts of the lung. You can feel it slightly higher, slightly lower, and slightly at the bottom. So, lots of things to talk through. I mean, there are people, I say, that spend their lifetimes looking into this and writing incredible books on it. And there's, I think I should just grab, hold on one second, if I can quickly find it, the Bible of, I
love it, the Bible of Hasta Mudras.
Here it is. This is the one. Yeah. This is the one that most people recommend, if you can see that. And that's Gertrude Hirsch. And I think she was one of the first Westerners. She talks about her journey through depression and anxiety in yoga and how it brought her back. And she this is a good book, and she talks a lot. In fact, I've just opened it up conveniently at the Hakini Mudra, which is the one we were just talking about, which is the steeple one. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So it can be practiced at any time. You can do true wonders. You can keep it in the back of your mind in case of an emergency. I mean, that's how strongly she feels that one. It really helps you come in. So Yeah.
Well, I know there's lots of us around who like and do practice yoga out off the mat. And one thing that we can do with Hasta Mudras, a lot of people are, talk about chair yoga, and they talk about chair yoga for people who are unable to use their legs or can't stand to do their yoga. But actually, there are very many of us who sit on chairs for long. I'm probably not one of them, but with a dog and a cat and a busy life. But many of us are chair bound in our jobs and in our lives, and children more than anything are stuck at school sitting far from their children, and many people in their work lives are. So to be able to sit at your desk and use a mudra and use hand yoga in our lives would be very, very valuable. And I'm a bit of a boffin and I love to learn more.
I mean, there's a line in my dissertation which I think it was from someone I interviewed on this subject, and they said exactly that, Julia. They said, isn't it amazing to think that if you couldn't do anything else, as long as you could move your hands and you could breathe, you'd be doing yoga. And I really love that. I really love that, because I just thought, yes, think what you could do with your hands and the breath, a lot.
Yeah, in rehabilitation, it's amazing when you said that neurosurgeons have looked at the hands, because that tends to be an area of medicine that is most attuned with the gentler yoga practices, the meditation, the breathing, the Hasta Mudras. It's like, if you want to find somewhere in science that recognizes the benefit, then isn't it funny that it's neuroscience that seems to be the
they've done all kinds
that closely
of studies on meditation and mantra chanting, and there's comparative to other areas of study, not a lot, but there's still quite a lot. If you look online and just sort of Google, it's amazing what comes up. And then the other part that was interesting with mudras is hard to prove it, but there's this idea that perhaps it's a bit like the same part of the brain lights up when you move your fingers in different ways as when you're learning a language. So, and then think about sign language, right? So, is this almost like a language for the brain in a way? So there's so much to think through, and that's why I wrote my dissertation on it. And it's only 4,500 words, and you could probably spend a lifetime on this stuff, and probably really, if you wanted to write 4,000 words on one mudra, if you wanted to really look at it. So it's a quick overview, but it's something I still find helpful, and something that I still want to spend more time going into, particularly with the history of yoga, and sort of finding a little bit more about, because these, when you look up they were first mentioned in some of the ancient texts, some of these hand mudras, so they're ancient. They're as ancient as every other. They're part of the meditative ancient practice of yoga before the moving physical body part that came in, which really is much more recent. But the original text talk about mudras.
Sure. Yeah.
So. Yeah. I mean, and as I said to my students on the first week of my yoga basics course, it's like, this stuff's been around a while. It's probably something in it,
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Take what you want from it, but it's alive and thriving. So there must be some benefit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've really piqued my interest, Jo. You did anyway. When you first said, I wrote about Hasta Mudras, is that something that might be interesting to hear? I said, yes, definitely. I'm fascinated by that. I'm really, really looking forward to you coming to join us at the Teaching Forum. It's the 27th, I think. The 26th, Wednesday the 26th of February that you'll be with us. It's 1:30 till 3:30 at Finchley Yoga, which is in West Finchley, so it's West Finchley Tube, and there is parking nearby if people want to drive to it. To spend 2 hours with you, playing with my hands and feeling what that can do.
Yeah,
really looking forward to it, because I think it's something that you don't necessarily, they always say practice for a month before you share any practice that you do. Practice every day for a month. We could do that, but actually there's probably Hasta Mudras that we're using anyway in class, so we might be doing this
exactly
to release out the hands, and we're probably all doing Namaste in some way, opening out in this way, some way. So to be able to experience it in a different way and then come back to our classes and share it will be really lovely. I feel like we're going to spend a couple of hours with you, and then be able to kind of go back
Yeah.
into our own space and have a play.
Yeah, and I'll bring the books that I really like, so you can have a look at those. And maybe if people are interested afterwards, they can always have a copy of my dissertation, which is a very easy read. It's very short. And I was just going to say the last thing, Julia, is that also, like with everything, you can just take one aspect of it. So you can even you could theme a class around one mudra, and just in your flow, as you're doing stuff, just do your warrior 1 with your hands in a different mudra, do your warrior 2 using a different mudra, just bring it into a class, and as part of the theme can also be really fun and interesting. So it doesn't have to be sort of it can be a very light touch.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
So
cool.
If you are interested in finding out more on how you can very easily integrate it into classes, then do come and join us. I'll make sure that all the details, and as always, the Teacher Forum is an event that you can come to, and you can gift £10, which goes, all the profits go to shelter. There are, it's nice to know that there's 2 hours of CPD, 2 hours of learning a little bit more about yoga that you can come to without any major pressure. And if people can't afford the £10, or for any reason don't feel they're able to give that, then this really is something that's open to everybody. Whatever yoga you practice, whatever tradition you come from, this is open to you to come along and join us. So
Nice.
thank you for your time.
Pleasure, Julia. Look forward
really
to seeing you.
Yeah, I'm really excited
All right, cool.
See you on the 26th of February. Thank you.
Look forward to it. Take care. Bye.